Hey everyone, I'm Erica Matsumoto, the Director of Partnerships and New Initiatives at the NYC Media Lab. Welcome back to day 3 of our summit. We made it to our final day. And for those that are just joining, Abram and I are excited to welcome you to our virtual event.
Thank you, Erica. I'm Abram Maldonado, Associate Director for 5G at Tech. The past 2 days gave us really a lot to think about.
Indeed they did. Let's talk takeaways. Day 1 was all about tech policy and the complexity of improving our tech media and internet landscape. Abe, like one of Tristan's call to actions, we should swap our Facebook feeds to better understand someone else's reality.
Absolutely. If you share your Facebook feed, I'll share my TikTok. And day 2, we learned that back in 2010, there were some things that we got right and some things that we got wrong. But as Andrew Yang pointed out, there's still time to change the course of what's ahead of us, especially around an individual's rights to their own data.
Agreed, that data dividend project is spot on. And before we go into our program for today, we want to encourage you to share your thoughts and feedback with us on our Whova platform. So let's turn to today because we have an amazing program that'll explore the emerging, quickly evolving world of storytelling and creative tech. We'll begin with a conversation with Vernon Reid, Grammy-winning guitarist and songwriter, and Ascap Lab artist in residence.
We'll then host a fireside chat with artist and writer Arya Dean and Trevor McFedries, the creator of Brud and Little Michaela.
After that, we have an awesome showcase and panel on what's next in immersive tech and generative media. We'll hear from 3 companies, Rosebud AI, Scatter, and Sensorium.
Then we'll close the afternoon with 3 workshops that will allow folks to deep dive and interact with leaders in the field. We'll be discussing emerging sports tech and data insights in the NBA, Dance On, how art motivates code, and in 3D, breaking the last digital barrier, the path to full digital presence.
All right, so to kick things off, let's turn it over to Brooke Epley from Ascap Labs.
Awesome. See you on the other side.
Hello, everyone. I think I can speak for the group assembled on screen that we're so glad to be here and that you can join us. My name is Brooke Epley. I am currently serving as the SVP of Strategy, Partnerships, and Innovation at Ascap, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. For those of you not working in the music industry, Ascap is a 106-year-old organization that operates on a not-for-profit basis, which collects song performance royalties on behalf of 700,000 songwriters and music publishers in the United States. I'm here today wearing my hat as a creator and leader of the Ascap Lab, an innovation initiative that Ascap launched in late September 2019. A year in, we've completed our first early stage seed project in conjunction with the New York City Media Lab, which you'll hear more about today. Brought on Vernon Reid as our artist in residence, who is the guest we are honored to have with us today. Hosted a couple of speaker events on innovation-themed topics. Our next one is on October 15th with Hod Lipson speaking on artificial intelligence. And there's much more to come. Given the theme of today's summit on creativity and innovation, we thought it would be really interesting to bring a couple of the teams from our seed project together with Vernon Reid to have a conversation about creativity and its role in innovation from various vantage points. Before we do further introductions, I want to set the stage by spending a couple of minutes giving you a sense of our experimental seed program. So to do that, we'll share a short video that provides a quick overview of the program and the team's projects. Ascap Lab is Ascap's innovation initiative, which we created just under a year ago to develop new technology, talent, business, approaches, and partnerships to create value for music creators, ultimately with the aim of differentiating Ascap as the future-forward PRO for creatives. We've kickstarted a number of projects as part of this initiative, including funding a seed stage project with the New York City Media Lab. The lab sponsored an 11-week open university challenge for graduate students and faculty in music, design, and technology to reimagine how we might leverage and combine developments in disciplines such as machine intelligence, extended reality, voice-controlled user interfaces, and object detection, to name a few, to rethink the ways we can create or experience music. Ultimately, out of many applicants, we provided grants to 5 teams who developed some very ambitious projects.
What was sort of your motivation or inspiration for taking on this project?
With the chiller, what we want to do is to detect and visualize peak moments of musical emotion, of pleasure in real-life environments.
A lot of the tools out there for making music, you still have to overcome a technical barrier. We just want people to just enter this interface and just move around and kind of just use what they have and not really think about the technical challenges.
Octavia is envisioning a future where music is immersive, interactive, and embodied.
There's visual albums, live albums, virtual concerts, and more after COVID. This is kind of something that we really need to focus on, and bringing it into a more immersive and enjoyable experience is a huge motivation for us.
First of all, our team was brought together by our passion for music and a strong interest in using emerging technology to explore innovative ways to compose and experience music.
We believe that everyone has their own musical creativity inside, even with no musical background. And we also believe that everything has its own inner voice and music.
So we imagine a world where sound and our hands blend together in a device that allows for a more natural interaction. We want it to be playful to incite joy and discovery. We want it to be musical to make sure that we're creating something harmonic and melodic. We wanted something to be design-oriented so it can make a statement. And finally, something universal, so that can be played by lots of people.
This was actually the first program that we've run that was entirely virtual from start to finish.
The spirit and energy of the work you're doing is really inspiring to me. And I'm excited about today. I'm excited about seeing your work.
This is the best review we've ever got in our life.
It was totally collaborative, and it was just a really awesome experience.
Being able to bounce ideas with you guys in so many different angles, that was vital, I think.
It was very obvious that we can achieve something really nice together.
Our team's interests are very well aligned with the goals that the program is trying to accomplish.
Ascap is not only investing in the future of music, we are creating it. By promoting innovation, Ascap will support our songwriter and publisher members' ventures to reimagine music. And here with us today are representatives of two of the teams, Pablo Ripolles of Team Chillers and David Azar of Mad for MIDI. Pablo, do you want to spend a minute or two to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Pablo Ripolles. I am a professor in the Department of Psychology and the Department of Music and Performing Arts and Professions in NYU. And we, a team of researchers from these departments and also from MARL and from the Center for Language, Music and Emotion, CLAIM, have developed this, which is a wearable device capable of detecting goosebumps. We all love music, and when we listen to music and we have a peak moment of pleasure, we have these things that we identify as chills or shivers down the spine. And these chills many times come with a physiological reaction, that is goosebumps. We have a little device based on the Raspberry Pi architecture that is able to track these peak moments of emotion and provide biofeedback, which basically lighting up an LED strip when somebody is feeling a big moment of emotion from music. The rest of the team are Dana Bevilacqua, Michal Goldstein, and Claire Perofi. And I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Pablo. And David, please take a minute to tell us who you are and your involvement in the SEED project.
Sure. Thank you all so much. Pleasure to be here. My name is David Azar. I'm a recent graduate from the ITP NYU program. Sorry, the NYU ITP program. We focused a lot on engineering and technology around music and creativity. Together as a team, we created the MAD sampler, which is a voice and audio recorder and editor that uses a non-traditional interface for experimentation. Our team is made up of 4 designers, engineers, and technologists who are extremely passionate about product design, musical exploration, and innovation. And at the beginning of this program, we tasked ourselves with creating a self-contained device with a new interface to break away from the traditional piano-like layout that we see in most electronic musical instruments nowadays. And during this summer, we worked together with Ascap and the New York City Media Lab to create our vision of that, which we'll share with you in a sec. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. And last, but most certainly not least, I'd like to introduce Vernon Reid, who is the solo artist and lead guitarist for renowned rock group Living Colour, which debuted to massive critical acclaim in 1988 with the album Vivid, including the Grammy-winning hit Cult of Personality. This may date me a bit, and I've never told Vernon this, but I associate that song with a roller skating rink I used to go to on Saturdays in the late 80s. Perhaps not the association most people have, but I think it's a great example of the song's staying power after all these years. Living Colour would go on to release Time's Up in 1990 and Stain in 1993, before temporarily disbanding in 1995. Vernon Reid released his first solo record in 1996, Mistaken Identity, and has gone on to record and release albums with a variety of collaborators, including DJ Logic and Mask. He is an active session artist and producer, including work on 2 Grammy-nominated albums, Papa in 1999 by the African vocalist Salif Keita, and Memphis Blood, The Sun Sessions in 2001 by guitarist James Blood Ulmer. In addition to serving as artist in residence with the Ascap Lab, Reid continues to record and tour with Living Colour and currently appears on Bruce Hornsby's latest album, Non-Secure Connection. I'll add that on a personal note, I've had the opportunity to brainstorm and collaborate with Vernon Reid over the course of the year, and it has been such a pleasure trading ideas and musing on things to come or things that should be. Vernon is such a creative thinker and really has his finger on the pulse of now. We're really lucky to have his involvement in the Ascap Lab. So Vernon, before we kick things off, how are you doing?
Thank you, Brooke, for that wonderful introduction. I'm doing as well as anyone in a dystopian hellscape can be doing. It's a challenging time at the moment. As a person who loves to play live as well as in the studio, and really enjoys working with all kinds of musicians and all kinds of artists. It is a very challenging time. A lot of things have gone virtual. In this time period, I was able to work with George Clinton on a song, and I completed work on a documentary directed by Brad Lichtenstein, and it's a really cool film. And one of the producers on that film is Snoop Dogg. He's one of the executive producers of this film called When Claude Got Shot, which is about gun violence in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And, you know, I've worked with the director Brad on a number of projects, including an Oculus, a kind of a virtual film that's partly animated, that was made for the Oculus VR film, which was centered around Arthur Ashe. I think it's Arthur Ashe 68, and when Arthur Ashe, anyway, all that to say, I've been involved in technology my entire career. A lot of the technologies is through the guitar, and have played all different types of effects and guitar synthesis, and have stayed involved. In fact, I recently have been doing custom presets for Native Instruments, and as well as for Line 6 for new products or new iterations of products that are just being released now. I think Native Instruments 13 Complete has just been released, and the next version of the Helix platform software is about to come out. I think I might have busted up my NDA, but oops, oh well. Trade secrets. No, but no, it's been interesting and fascinating to see what changes in technology and musical expression, the way and the story of technology in music is really a fascinating one. And it's an ongoing one. We went from really just one track recording, mono recording, to stereo recording, to 24 track and multi-track recording. And what's happened is now kids are selling beats that they're making on their phone, beats that they're making in GarageBand, and beats that they're doing on iPad on their iPad. In fact, I believe there's a artist that was nominated or won a Grammy, and they did all the engineering on their iPad. So we're going through a crazy time, but at the same time, vinyl records, which you would have thought would have totally disappeared, vinyl records, like with the tenacity of the cockroach, vinyl records still exist. And so it's a fascinating and very strange time to be a creative person in music and in multimedia.
Yeah. Would you say that, I mean, it sounds like you've been very busy. How do you think COVID and the pandemic has affected your creative process?
Well, what's interesting is that for a lot of artists, this lockdown thing, a lot of my compatriots, we don't have regular jobs, so a lot of us have been in lockdown, in our various audio laboratories and studios and caves, non-gender specific caves. So we have a lot of alone time, but we also have the catharsis of playing live, of going on tour and playing locally and all those, and that's the part of it that's been taken away and has changed the nature of collaboration. And that's and I know a lot of writers and other creative people as well, filmmakers and people in my crowd were all thinking, okay, so what's what's next, or what if concerts don't come back? How long is this going to go on? And there's a lot of anxiety around it, and that can be a kind of fuel for creativity, but also there's an opportunity for centering and stillness that's afforded to us now to really stop and think, because there's a kind of tyranny of anytime you meet somebody, you got to have 10 projects that you're doing. I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm doing this. And this is a time where we could drop that. We could maybe drop that. And it's actually okay to say, you know what? I'm trying to figure it out. I don't know what's next. And out of that, new things will come out of those spaces that we create for ourselves.
Yeah, sometimes the constraints imposed upon us by, social distancing or any other kinds of constraints can create new possibilities around the creative process. Ascap actually just went through, we're piloting this workshop on creativity. The Lulu and Leo Fund has this workshop called Choose Creativity, and it's about creativity as a mode of, certainly as a mode of artistic expression, but also as an act of, as a constructive act rather than a destructive act. And there's 10 sessions that they do, and each one has a theme, and they have these principles of creativity. And I think it's kind of a powerful list. Authentic, resourceful, curious, unconventional, patient, expressive, intuitive, present, inventive, and inspired. And all of these traits, I think, during these past few months, as we've had to kind of quarantine, can create new opportunities to really have a rich creative period.
It's been funny. I've been watching on YouTube some of David Lynch has done these lectures talking about meditation, and listening to different filmmakers. Another person who's really great is Guillermo del Toro. And Guillermo del Toro did an interview with Alec Baldwin, and it was so inspiring, because it's just kind of like, well, he talks about how much he loves the monsters that he creates and how he's so fascinated, and he goes into these rabbit holes. And because he's like largely self-taught as a filmmaker, he created this whole, it's incredibly inspiring. And not to say that the institutions all have their place. Of course they do. But the idea of people going down the rabbit, figuring out, testing, experimenting, being less concerned with the efficacy of the end result, creating accidents, creating happy accidents and collisions. Like that's how hip hop started. That's how so many different things came into being. Like the 808 drum machine. I love the story about how the 808 drum machine was a product that failed. Basically, Roland was trying to sell the 808 drum machine, and it was really expensive, and they weren't moving them. And so they were blowing them out on 48th Street. 48th Street was a music district that no longer exists. Boo-hoo. Anyway, they were blowing them out. They're blowing them out for dropping them from $500 to about $200, and that made them affordable for African Bambaataa and the people from Soul Sonic Force to pick them up, and they changed the course of music history. I mean, Play at Your Own Risk, came out of this thing. So anyway, blah blah blah. Woof, woof, woof.
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned earlier the kind of you've been in the music business for 30 plus.
Good gosh almighty.
And you've seen an incredible evolution take place, including things like the 808 drum machine. And do you have any sense of how you think things will evolve in the next few years, or maybe the most exciting piece of music tech that you've seen recently? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that there's different softwares that I like. Like I'm an Ableton Live user, and for a long time, Ableton was considered to be a DJ toy. When it started out, it was not considered to be a serious thing, and then it just, the company kept adding features and making advances, and now Ableton Live is a DAW that has gained a lot of respect. It's not at the same level of Pro Tools, but a lot of creative people, it's easy to do a lot of creative things with Ableton, whereas with a lot of other DAWs, there are a lot of, in other words, like if you want to work with MIDI and audio, nothing is easier to work with than Ableton Live, because Ableton Live is essentially the same product as it was when it was version 1. It just added features, but the essential nature of it hasn't changed. Whereas with other products, they go through the thing where they make the product was great, and then they make the product super complicated. Like I was a Cubase guy. I loved Cubase and Cubase VST. And then Cubase became, oh my God, what happened to this? And Logic was super complicated.
Oh, Logic, yeah.
Logic was a nightmare.
It's funny how you're touching on something that's interesting. There's an inertia to, like, you start out with something that makes sense, but then you layer on, and then suddenly it's so complex. I remember, this was probably 20 years ago now, but I was trying to make something within Logic, and I was struggling with it. And then finally someone pointed out, oh, you just have to tick this box, which was buried in like 3 different menus, and then everything worked. But
it's amazing. It's amazing. And now that, it was, Logic was acquired by Apple, and they have this other software, GarageBand, which is very simple. And the thing that's cool is that you can start a project in GarageBand and then open it in Logic and then kind of add the complications that you want from that. So different things have developed and changed over time. It's funny because just like in evolution, a lot of designs are tried, many of them fail, and then a few things, for whatever reason, a few apps, products, softwares, the same thing with social programs, social media programs, things become sticky. I remember when people completely discounted Twitter. Twitter is, what, blah, blah, blah. People used to snark Like old media used to snark on Twitter all the time. And then the Arab Spring happened, and then the whole thing flipped. The whole thing flipped. And unfortunately, the Arab Spring was also crushed, but then Twitter became something that everyone had to take seriously. And now we take it seriously because the president uses Twitter all the time. So, so it's weird how, like, MySpace, I thought MySpace was cool, and nobody, but MySpace still exists. It may come back.
Well, so just on this idea of, future tech, like what's next, maybe this is a good time to switch to the teams and the two representatives that we have on the call. Let's see, let's take David first. How did you come up with your idea? And maybe for the folks watching, you can describe, what you actually built and so on.
Sure. I want to say it wasn't a me thing. It's 100% a team effort. Our team is made of Matt Ross, Dana Elkis, Arnav Chakravarti, and myself. And we approached this problem. We approached the problem that we felt the electronic music instruments are very limited in their interfaces. Today you have your keys, you have your knobs, you have your buttons. And aside from a few distinct products like a Rowley or a few products by Teenage Engineering, you have really there's a few others more niche like the Linstrument. And if you keep going, there's a huge amounts of things like the Hacking Continuum. But you either find that they're either too expensive or too complicated. Maybe a few of those might be $5,000. Definitely not an entry-level tool for a lot of people. And we felt that the available technologies were very limiting in terms of allowing people to be more exploratory. So I just want to share a screen super briefly to paint a picture of our idea. So we created this sampler, audio sampler and editor that has a very large silicone-based surface at the very front. And by using the yellow recording button, the one you see there, you can record a 5-second sample. And we wrote algorithms that would split that and we'll lay it on the pad. And you would be able to modify those sounds by pressing harder on the silicone or moving your hands in different ways. Just to see everything, this was made with off-the-shelf components and open source technologies. We used Ableton to prototype some of the sounds, and we used a tool called Pure Data to build our audio engine, which Pure Data is very similar to what Max MSP is nowadays. But yeah, the thesis that we had is how do we approach the problem of limited expressivity with affordable off-the-shelf components with a low entry level so that musicians can become technologists and technologists can become musicians. And that's how we approached the problem. And we went back and forth with so many ideas. At first, we wanted to create just a standalone MIDI interface, but we realized that we wanted to build a self-contained device that would provide the experience of a whole product from like an end-to-end thing. And that was the approach that we took. And coming back and forth with Ascap and our mentors at the New York City Lab and our fellow teams, the cohort, going back and forth, having those sessions, those feedback sessions was a tremendous opportunity and something that shaped the product.
That I think was particularly remarkable about your team's project was that you guys started from literally scratch.
Yeah.
You built a full prototype during the 11-week program. And to do that, you had to build a sensor, like a new kind of sensor from scratch. And I just think that's not to be, it would be easy to not realize like the depth of work that you guys did to get to where you were. And so anyway, I just was really impressed with that. So Vernon, as a working musician, what's your reaction to this, the thing that they made, any questions you might have for them and so on?
Well, okay, so this is a sampler.
It is.
That has a control, that has basically a silicon pad on top. Mm-hmm. And by using pressure, you can change what the sample does. Like you can affect different parameters, or does it have effects built in, or does it utilize, say, the effects in like Ableton?
No, it's a standalone thing. So
Totally standalone.
Yeah,
Okay.
everything is. We used Ableton to prototype. It's easier to get started with that.
Okay.
And then we moved it to here. This thing is adding 3 effects. So we have a chorus, a change of pitch, and a low pass filter.
Okay.
And each of these is mapped to a different dimension on the pad. So if you press and you move left and right, you add or remove chorus, right? If you press and move up and down, you switch up or down the pitch. And if you press harder or softer, you add or remove, or you basically change the cutoff frequency of the low pass filter.
Right. So my initial reaction is, this is dope. It reminds me of the Sensel Morph.
Yeah.
It's interesting as it's standalone. You can record. Do you record audio into it? You can record audio into it. Obviously, it's standalone, right? So my first reaction is immediately I want a lot more effects. Yeah. Like I want a ring modulator. I want delay. You know what I mean? It makes me think, because my immediate reaction is I'm into it, and it's got implications. It's got all kinds of implications. Like, say, I was just thinking about sound design and in a medium like podcasting, where you could have somebody speak, like sample. You could sample yourself speaking and affect your voice in real time.
Yep.
The one question I have is, okay, so could this also work as a foot pad? In other words, could, say, if I'm playing guitar, if I want to affect things and have my hands free, and I get the fact that if I press on one corner or another corner, I'm going to affect a certain thing. So, like, I think, I would want one of these on the floor so that I could put my foot on it and have a different thing. That it's different than having an expression pedal, right? It's like the thing is built into it, right? So just by moving my foot around, I can affect things or what have you. If somebody's playing trumpet and they have it, it's different than like, okay, so Miles had a wah-wah pedal and everybody got mad. You know what I mean? And this is kind of like, okay, so the next generation, like some young horn player connects to something like this, and then because of the fact that it's silicon and the pressure they put on changes, that's different than a wah-wah, because wah-wah is just a rocker, and it's expressive. It's very expressive. I mean, Hendrix and Miles and a whole bunch of other people, Wah-Wah Watson, they were able to just by the speed and whatever, they got a lot of awesome sounds. I think about like sort of formant filtering and things like that. So on the one hand, I could see it as a basis for sampling, of course. But then I turn around and go, oh man, this could have implications because of the fact that it's not just a switch and it's not a rocker pedal. It's like you move your foot on it and you have that kind of feeling to it. The way people affect the things that they're affecting will change in a fundamentally different way. So those are like immediate, you know what I mean, impressions I get, is that you not only created a device, you also created a new kind of it's like a platform. It's like a device, but it's also a platform. In other words, it could be utilized as a kind of effect, not just for sampling, but not to take it away from your initial intention. But that's part of the thing is we want devices that don't just prescribe what to do with them, but allow for happy accidents and the unintended thing that is super dope and super cool. It's like
the beautiful oops.
The beautiful oops.
Yeah.
That's a great way of putting it. So I look at it and go, oh man, don't stop there. Like
oh, we won't.
You know what I mean? Like the first time Chord came out with the Chaos Pad, right? And the Chaos Pad is it's a kind of control surface, and you can affect things by swiping your finger around. And when the first time I saw that, I said, "Oh, you should make one of those the size of a dance floor. You should make an entire dance floor. You should take everything that you're doing with this, and then scale it up, and then have an entire dance floor. That's a Chaos Pad." and you're talking about changing the concept of DJing. It becomes a whole other thing. Now, that's as typical of my wildly impractical notions.
I love it. I'd go to that dance floor.
You know what I mean? But imagine you went to a club and actually you could have an effect that, like, if say people are forming a circle, someone's really getting their groove on, you could focus, you could change what happens to the music by what they're doing in that particular area of the floor. But we're talking about a lot of money and a lot of R&D for a thing that's,
Well, before we switch to Pablo and talking about Team Chillers, David, one final question for you. In your wildest dreams, we were just thinking very big, the size of a dance floor big. But in your wildest dreams, what are your hopes for your project's ultimate impact?
It's a great question. And the answer touches a bit on what Vernon was just saying. We had a lot of internal, not arguments, but discussions within our team.
Arguments are fine, bro.
We fought with each other. Now, we were trying to find that vision, right? Because we saw this potential seed of an idea going many multiple ways. Changing sound live was one of them, definitely. Being able to, mostly with vocals, we thought about it that way. Being able to change the effects of a mic live with all your fingers was one of the ideas. But the idea, the direction I think where we see this in our wildest dreams is to create an experience. It's not so much about the product, but it's about the experience of being able to have this thing on your backpack or on your pocket, depending on the size, and just being able to take it out, record something that you see that you hear on the street. And music is about that bubble and that personal space that only you and the music and the people you play with can provide. So if the whole world becomes your stage and you can record any piece of music, any piece of sound, and then change it live and add more effects and save them and share it with more people, and the thing becomes more of a platform and a shared experience with people you don't even know, that would be super interesting. And honestly, it's very exciting to us. It's something I want to use and I want others to use. And the team feels the same way.
Is your device, are you thinking about doing anything like via Kickstarter or something like that? We've commercially.
Yeah, we're starting to go down that path. As of right now, the feature set that we chose and the form factor and maybe the material, the silicone is, in terms of robustness, might not be the best way to go forward. It's really hard to keep it clean. We've learned so many things by going through this process, and innovation is an iterative process. But I feel that once we find that, that robust MVP, minimum viable product, we're very interested in launching this. There's so many channels to this nowadays, and many forms of funding. Kickstarter is certainly one of them, for sure. We wanna put it in hands of more musicians to get amazing feedback.
I want one.
Oh, I'll give you one myself.
We can make sure that we can arrange that. So
definitely, that would be amazing.
So the MAD by Team MIDI device kind of represented the the side of the challenge, which was to rethink how we create music. Team Chillers answered the other side of the challenge, which was how can we change how we experience music. And so Pablo, do you want to spend a minute just telling us a little bit more about your project and what was the genesis for the idea was and what you're trying to accomplish with it?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I'm a researcher, and part of what I do is to study the reward system in the brain, right? So how our brain processes rewarding stuff. And music is something that everybody finds rewarding, everybody finds pleasurable, but it's like a very special thing, right? It's very particular to each of us, and it's a thing that I'm baffled by the fact that the same pattern of sounds can be incredibly pleasurable for one person and totally the opposite for another. I always use the same example. Among the many things that I like about music, I love bagpipes, and I'm listening to bagpipes and I'm having chills and goosebumps, and then my wife is looking at me going like, what is this? What is this noise, right? So the origin of chillers is because we really want to understand better how is it possible that the pattern of sounds has this huge effect on us, on human beings, and why is it so different from person to person, right? And we know how to do that. We know how to study behavioral or physiological or brain reactions in the lab, but it's very anticlimactic, right? You are in front of a computer, or you are connected to some electrodes, or you are inside of an MRI machine, and yeah, we can do that. But I always was bothered because I was like, this is not the way we listen to music. We listen to music while we dance. We listen to music while we are in a live show. And I want to know more about how do we react to music in the real world, right? So a year ago, I had this idea. I woke up one day and I was like, I got it. We're going to measure goosebumps. We're going to use a camera to record a patch of skin in the arm, and we're going to measure goosebumps. Because with many of the things that we use inside of the lab, the problem that we have is that the sensors, if you move, there is a lot of noise, and then you can no longer detect anything. But with a camera, we wouldn't have that problem. And I was like, okay, this is the best idea I've ever had in my life. And of course, I went online, and somebody had already done that. So there is this Professor Matthias Benedek who developed an algorithm that can detect goosebumps from a recording of a patch of skin, right? The problem that they had is that it was something that was still connected to a computer, right? So then with the rest of the team, we started to think about how to turn this into a wearable, into something portable, that an affordable, even like a do-it-yourself kind of device that is open source, that anybody can use, that anybody can create on their own. And then we chose to use the Raspberry Pi architecture, which is this. This is a Raspberry Pi Zero. It costs $10. It's a mini computer, and it has the capabilities of the first Xbox. So we attach a camera to that, and thanks to the help of the Ascap team and the New York City Media Lab team, we were creating over the pandemic, and we ended up with this little thing here, which is portable, and the moment it detects a goosebump, it lights these LEDs to share with everybody that somebody is experiencing a peak of emotion. Now, I'm gonna very quickly share my screen. So this is a little bit of a show that I put up with one of my friends. I'm wearing the chiller on my arm, and you will see on the top right the patch of skin, on the bottom right the amplitude of the goosebump detected and how the LED lights up when I'm having a goosebump.
I think the best part of this video, Pablo, is just watching you dance and getting really into the music.
So this is basically the device that we have created. For us, it's important because it gives us a new way to measure reward and emotion in real life. The music tech aspect of this is that now we have developed an affordable device that people can use in a concert to share their emotion in a natural way, to provide some kind of biofeedback. And for us, it's also very important that we think that this also can be an educational project to teach, for example, high schoolers about computer science, about neurophysiology, and about neuroscience.
Vernon, real quick, because we're almost out of time, what do you think? Like, is it useful to be able to detect goosebumps in performance?
So, okay. I think it's so, okay, so not to be snarky, but my immediate thought is that, you know, it would be great for speed dating.
For speed dating?
Yeah. Like,
yeah.
like each person puts on the thing, and they meet, and then you see, it's like you see, oh, the reaction, is right there. Which some people may not want that. So, I think it's cool. I think it's really interesting, um, especially if you have. Do you have colors? Okay, so here's the question: is it able to change to different colors, or does it just go? Do you have blue, green?
Yes, absolutely. So this is the most basic thing that we have done, which is just light up as green. But actually, you can change colors. You can show a pattern of different colors that change at different speed according to the amplitude of the goosebump. You can also transmit that to a screen and then show the aggregated emotion by the audience or even by the performers. So you can turn the signal into whatever you want.
That's really interesting. That's really, yeah. Huh. See, again, that's almost like if you're DJing, right? Say you're DJing, and the flow of the evening, so you want to create a blue moment, and you figured out, okay, this chill out track does that. And then you could say, okay, if you see the amplitude going down, you could maybe change your set. You could see what's going on, and then you could go, oh, you know what? I need to shift. I need to go left, or I need to go
Yes,
right.
absolutely.
And, and that's a kind of somewhat practical, and also weirdly enough, you could use it for like sort of a DJ R&D, right? There's actual performance, but then say, I want a test group, right? I want a test group. So
Yes.
say you're a highfalutin, DJ guy, right? You say, okay, I've got a super big show coming up. But what I want to do, I've got a new set with some new joints. So I need to see how this is going to probably work. So then you have a bunch of volunteers. Say you have 100 volunteers or 200 volunteers in a space, and you could try out your thing, and then you can see from a small test group, you can go, oh, okay, this is working. I'm seeing red over here for this.
Yep.
I'm seeing blue over here for that. I'm seeing yellow over here for that.
You do have a couple of projects coming up, don't you, Vernon? So maybe
it's not just like well, it's just funny because the thing is they're like you build something because you have the impulse to do it. And then it's like you think, okay, well, this is the way it's going to be used. But then there's a bunch of other use cases that isn't, you know what I mean? That's not
Absolutely.
really,
Yeah.
that's not front of mind because you're so focused. It's just like you think your song is working one way, right? So the songwriters go through this all the time. You think your song is working one way. You think your lyric is working one way. And then somebody comes at you and says, this song is about blah to me. And you're like, what are you talking about? Like, there's a great podcast called Ear Hustle. And it's Ear Hustle is basically cast from San Quentin. It's all about people that have been in prison and what have you. And one episode of Ear Hustle, they were talking about how they transfer prisoners on these buses. And there was a prisoner who was convinced that the song Hotel California by the Eagles was about prison life. But when you hear how he interpreted it, he was very convincing. He was like, this, that, and the other, all that to say, you make a device for one thing, and then it has a whole other, for that matter, I mean, who knows? Like, say, you're in a restaurant, right? Because you get goosebumps for all kinds of, you get goosebumps. You get goosebumps if your favorite food is brought out. Before you eat it, you're gonna have goosebumps. So, there are all kind of things. I'm just saying, it's cool.
No, yeah, that's a very beautiful metaphor. The fact that we all give meaning to songs based on our own experiences, and this is also applied to our device because it's open source, so people can use it for whatever. So, as a matter of fact, you were saying about testing this with 200 people. If Brooke is going to ask me what is your dream, that's my dream, to test this with 200 people in a live audience and see what happens.
Well, thanks so much to all of you for sharing, for putting your creative energies into music in various ways, tackling it from a creative perspective or from a technology perspective, the creation, the experience of music. It's just really inspiring to see, how all of you approach your work. And it was nice to bring all of you together for this conversation. So thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all for joining us. We are so excited to feature our next fireside chat with Trevor McFedries and Aria Dean. They are going to talk about the future of storytelling, art, and AI. Trevor is the founder of the tech startup called Brud. He is the creator of a virtual pop star, Michaela, or Lil Michaela, a Gen Z teen with millions of fans around the world. Aria is an artist and a writer based in New York and Los Angeles. She is currently editor and curator at Rhizome. All right, Trevor, Aria, take it away.
Hey, I'm Trevor McFedries. I'm founder and CEO of Brud. Also do some fun little art stuff on the side and made some music in a past life. I think we're going to be talking a bit about Lil Michaela, one of the characters in our universe, and probably a good time to give you some context. So here's a sizzle, a little video context, one of these ways.
You never say how you really feel. How can I know if this thing is real? Is it all in my head? Am I making it up? Am I thinking too much? Why can't I just say it? 'Cause even if it's just in my mind, my heart is still hurting, so I know.
I can heavily relate to anyone who's ever felt out of place.
Because you're a robot.
What's up? It's Michaela here with YouTube Music at Coachella, and I'm joined by J Balvin.
What is your dream for the future?
For everyone to experience healing and safety.
Mick, tell everyone to go to the Brud YouTube and listen to your new song.
Go to the Brud YouTube and listen to my new song.
I made a brand new song just for my Michaelians, and I'm so excited to share it. And as always, don't forget to recharge your heart. Peace.
I'm Aria Dean. I'm an artist and writer, and I'm editor and curator at Rhizome, an organization founded in 1996 based at the New Museum that focuses on net art and digital culture. So yeah, we're going to talk about those things and yeah, Michaela and other surrounding concepts. Okay, so let me reopen this Google Doc.
Thanks for hanging out with me, Aria. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Anytime. My pleasure. Okay. And I think this is like a continuation, of course, of past conversations that we've had, like, you know, in a way, but we'll try to not get too far ahead of ourselves, I think. So, okay, I mean, I guess initially the first thing, to talk about is Lil Miquela at large.
Sure.
So I guess like, if you want to walk us through why and how and when and all that stuff about, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it could probably be pretty long-winded, but I'll try to keep it like mostly concise. I think that the company Brud and Miquela, the character, and for those at home who aren't familiar, I kind of think of the parent company almost like a Disney, and then Miquela almost like the Mickey or something in our universe, Mickey Mouse, that is. And it probably is a manifestation of like my lived experience and this idea of me being this kind of like software engineer kid who was poking around building stuff in Iowa, and then moved to LA, and went from this kind of like smaller town to a place where everyone was chasing their entrepreneurial or kind of like creative dreams and recognized you could do that. And, ended up getting like a football scholarship out of high school, and came back to LA and had this music opportunity where I was in a band that ended up putting out a top 10 record, and got to kind of see the machinations of like the big media machine. From that, joined Spotify and got to see how like the lean startup works and kind of like modern software development and talking to customers and shipping products. And, in between those things was producing artists and working with pop acts. And while at Spotify, I was managing and producing an artist named Banks. And, around 2015 or so, I was really spending a lot of time in kind of the traditional hacker chats that I lived in, whether it was on IRC or, similar spaces, and was encountering kind of like a newer ideology to me. Traditionally, those spaces had kind of been, pumped full of Kevin Kelly style Wired magazine, techno optimism. We were all going to save the world with the internet. And it had since kind of devolved into kind of like I guess like a more corrosive and regressive ideology from my point of view. And in parallel was discovering the television program Will and Grace far too late, and all this data around Will and Grace being largely responsible for the gay marriage push and eventual accomplishment in the United States, and got into some other information and data around the Jeffersons and civil rights, and kind of recognized that media could be this really powerful tool for creating social change. And started thinking, like, wouldn't it be cool if you could kind of do that narrative thing at the scale of a Facebook where you're touching billions in parallel? And that kind of presented this question, why hadn't that happened? And it started to become clear that traditional talent didn't scale well. Jennifer Lawrence couldn't speak Mandarin or Portuguese or whatever it was. And was there an opportunity to create a Rihanna or Katy Perry that could be everything to all people, or kind of like touch people globally and introduce themes that are important via these narratives that were as engaging or as compelling as a Kardashian or a Trump or whoever was dominating our kind of like, our media diets or feeds at the moment. And that's kind of like the seedlings that birthed into all this.
Okay, sorry, I'm like muting myself because all these like construction sounds outside the window. It's interesting. Well, okay, I have questions that sort of are sideways from that, but also before that, I'll say, so what has been surprising since, or like, how has your understanding of the project evolved as it's, actually, taken on this life online? And yeah, like what, like, update us, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's, for this audience, there are so many things every day. I think the thing that I usually echo is I often get lost in the technology piece. Like, it was clear even at the time, like there was a real big hype around VR when I started this thing, about headsets and gaming. I always felt that like the emergent metaverse, or kind of like spatial computing future, would be kind of less Ready Player One, kind of like virtual, all immersive kind of virtual experience, like more this digital layer on top of our lives. And I actually think, instead of being kind of like world driven, I think it would be like more character driven. And we'll see if that comes to pass. But tides have shifted that way. And in that moment, there was a lot of investment into the kind of emergent AR and VR space. Some of it, went away. A lot of VR shops closed. Obviously, stuff like Magic Leap has struggled. But the technological changes have been interesting. And I think I sometimes romanticize like the big way things evolve there. But ultimately, it always comes back to the story, the character, the kind of the core narrative stuff. I think that's been like a lesson learned over and over again. But for this audience, I've been really intrigued at how, our characters, especially Miquela, have moved through popular culture, kind of like immediately starting in kind of, maybe an older subset that kind of found it transgressive. I mean, we were on Instagram, and they kind of, I think, understood this was kind of a tongue-in-cheek way to explore a lot of like topical themes, and then kind of moved down quite a bit into like young YouTuber land, where there was like conspiracies and kind of like Shane Dawson YouTube commentary. and then kind of moved up the stack a bit where it became a bit more mainstream. And I feel like it was kind of like high school age conversation, and then went like way up the stack where I feel like those kids were talking to their parents, and we had like, you know, Tracy Ellis Rosses of the world reaching out and like wanting to hang out with Michaela. And so there is some kind of like cool anthropological thing to go back and probably look at the different cohorts and like demos of people that got into this thing along the way.
Right, you can kind of like map how culture moves in general from like just like it's like tagging something kind of and being like, okay, like now we're gonna see how that's really interesting. I also was gonna say, what was the YouTuber like, or was the conspiracy stuff around it like that?
Oh man, like you and I could probably talk about this stuff for like years, but I think it was, so there's a YouTuber named Shane Dawson who probably is like my age. I'm 34. I mean, he's been in like YouTube since the beginning, like full emo side bang YouTube, so, like, you know, sans serif or like slight serif DTC product era, whatever we're living in now. But he kind of had these series of videos where he would explore like conspiracy theory light stuff on his YouTube channel, where it would be like, you know, are Harry and Niall from One Direction secretly involved and have a baby together, you know, where you just be like, what? But there was probably some like fan fiction thing that like bled into like the Tumblr or Twitter sphere, and he would kind of riff on it. And with Michaela, there had been a Twitter thread where I think, you know, probably some young kid was like, what is this girl? Is she real? Is she a government conspiracy to like make us want to like buy into AI and robots? And he kind of took it a couple steps further where he was like, is this like a Sims 5, like the game, The Sims 5, like marketing ploy? Is this X? Yeah. And so it took on all of these lives. People started kind of, I guess, prescribing these narratives onto it. It like the project in that moment was like, I don't know, like Shepherd Fairy, Obey Giant, like digital version where like you stuck Michaela's head enough places, people just started like giving it meaning.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was like definitely a bizarre one, but those videos are still up, and we ended up doing some stuff with Shane and, you know, talking to him about the experience.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah. Like the sort of like, I mean, it's kind of, I guess, just sort of spinning out into like the larger, you know, ecosystem that Michaela exists in, thinking about that, but like the sort of ways in which it also models like this sort of, you know, like reality versus projection kind of like complex of like how people are receiving information online, which is like the sort of the obvious like centerpiece of a lot of conspiracy stuff, but also just part of our day-to-day experiences. So it's like, okay, there's the actuality of, you know, what she is, which is that, you know, she doesn't exist necessarily in the way that we, you know, that's a whole other philosophical, like whatever. But then like, but also like then like the, you know, sort of projections onto her become, I guess it's just like, yeah, how anyone is like traversing the internet, how there's like that synthesis or like slippage between the projection versus like the reality of like their lived experience. But in the end, it doesn't matter. Like, I mean, there's also like, and I've mentioned this to you before, and it probably isn't that interesting to talk about, but like the, you know, occasionally I'll see the like the not conspiracy, but the sort of like, you know, weird fake news thing that like, oh, like Lil Michaela is like made by a white guy, and like she's just like, you know, woman of color, and like, why would this man make this? And like this whole thing.
Yeah.
Like, and all like the sort of like, you know, that side of the conversation. But then it's like, well, like, yeah, but it's all projection of like what someone expects the narrative to be, even like because of like coming out of like a, you know, sorry, whatever. Anyway, so that's like,
no, I think that's super interesting to me. Like I often think about when I was first on the internet, like I kind of am mentally like zoomered out. Like I live mostly on like Discord and like weird like cultural corners where it's like me and 15-year-olds talking about like Minecraft mods or whatever. But I also was a product of like this kind of like, I remember asking my grandma for like a 56K modem when I was like in middle school. And so in that era, I remember like this kind of trope of being like, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog, that kind of like that cartoon. And I think generationally, like this new era is like on the internet, like no one knows that like the people on the other side of the screen, like they aren't a dog, and then you can project that onto them. Like I'm still kind of working this thought, and like, but like the ability to kind of project meaning onto the person behind the screen because they can't necessarily defend who they are, because there is that kind of that lossy thing where you don't know who's behind it, allows people to kind of create these narratives and kind of like huddle around them and define communities among things that are often untrue. You know, insert like QAnon or whatever else.
Yeah, no, it's super. I mean, I think like it's like, yeah, like kind of trying to track that arc of like the development or devolution of that, you know, classic, you know, on the internet, no one knows your dog thing. Like it's interesting because there was this sort of like linear progression almost, you know, from that moment to like then like, yeah, super corporatized internet where it's like, oh, like now, like not only does everyone know, yeah, exactly who you are, but also like every last move you're making is like tracked, whatever. But then, yeah, it's like kind of like the sort of, I want to say it's like almost like these two things have grown over each other in this weird way. Like it's like I'm thinking about it like with like Plato's cave, which is like really silly to think about there, but sort of like, okay, like there's the fire and the flame and then like the shadows on the wall and like and kind of like this you know, but what's really happening is we're just in this cave and like everything's kind of like and like and there's no and then it's kind of like, and this is also sort of an ethos that maybe like, you know, but like I think then the answer is like, oh, it's anybody's game. And then it's kind of like, it is all about narrative. And it's like, okay, well, like you can't really prove it either way. And everyone's going to be so obsessed with proving what's actually going on that you can kind of just like say whatever. And then like, you know, kind of you brand campaigns and like you also can, you know, I don't know. It's.
No, I think that's totally interesting. I like, this is kind of maybe a bad metaphor riffing on that other thing, but like there's something probably really disorienting that we all experience. And that like, yeah, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog, but also on the internet, they all can convince the rest of the internet that you're a cat. And while in parallel, like all the like underbelly of the internet, like Facebook and everyone, they all know you're a dog and they're hammering you with like dog ads. And so you're like, wait, where the fuck do I actually exist?
Please tell them I'm a dog. Just tell them.
Yeah, like you know it. And then I think in that opportunity, and I think that kind of like hellscape is a lot of the things that like we try to navigate as an organization. And we do talk a lot about, you know, trying to build more equitable features for artists or creatives, because I do think like that back and forth, that chaos is disconcerting. Like it's going to be interesting to reflect back on this moment in time and look at the kind of like sheer amount of output of kind of like new ideas or creativity, because it does feel like anytime you put something into the ether, there's an opportunity to be canceled or challenged or have like your life ruined. And so, you know, if we can kind of create heat shields and like virtual characters, allow people to kind of like create from behind this thing, is that a kind of a veil that allows for kind of like a blossoming of new things versus like having to live in this narrow defined expectation of what you can be.
Which is really interesting. I think maybe it's like a way of like, it's sort of segueing into some of this like, you know, like community and collective, you know, whatever, like that stuff. In that, I mean, it's also a mode of working that has such like a long history in a way, right? Like I've been thinking a lot about, like, I don't know, in quarantine, I've got really into Georges Bataille and like, you know, like, and like that French intellectual scene or whatever. And just the history of like having like a squad, I guess, and like, you know, and be it an artist collective or be it, you know, just a group of people who then get historicized as spending time together. But the sort of method of, you know, actually like creating a discourse amongst an enclosed group of people in a sort of, you know, enclosed sphere to the degree that you can actually speak freely and not be like, you're not placing a bet. You're not like, I feel like on the larger internet, every opinion feels like you're like placing a bet and you're like, ooh, like, is it gonna, versus being able to actually, you know, have space to, really like create new ideas, like move things forward creatively. And it's interesting because I know like you've been working on some projects that maybe you can talk about your interest in that, which is maybe sort of separate from, or does it feed into the bread stuff, or is it more separate, and how do you?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, I mean, like I even think about, you know, our interactions or like how I got to know you or meet you. And like, I when I was first trying to find my way in the world as an adult, like looking for certain, you know, like aesthetic cues that people was like, oh, like you're this dude in like American Eagle Girl jeans. Like you're probably into Screamo. We can talk about that or whatever. And like, then like it became so easy for people to kind of co-opt those aesthetics. They kind of weren't great signals of where people fit in the greater cultural landscape. But there seems to be like new signals emerging, like even flipsterrunoff.com or something, like, you know, like your little pseudonym on Twitter. Like I see that and I'm like, oh, okay. Like there are layers to this cake that like most people wouldn't be able to participate in. So like a lot of us kind of form that squad or whatever. But backing into the question, like, you know, so much of my life, I mean, like I you know, hypothetically would have graduated from college in 2008. If I didn't drop out, and like a lot of my peers did. And so it was kind of this, you know, I started DJing professionally kind of in 2006, 2007. I remember playing like gifting suites for like celebrities in Hollywood, and they're getting like free laptops or free like all this crazy stuff, and then like 2009 playing the same things and give them like a free branded USD with like content on it from the same companies. And so being born in that recession and having to navigate the kind of professional world without a real understanding of what things used to look like for artists meant that a lot of my peers have been just like swimming as fast as we can for as long as we could, and we're now like pretty burnt and exhausted and trying to make sense of like what our economic reality is and what it means for like starting a family or all of these kind of like macro BuzzFeed trend pieces or whatever you read. And as a result, for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, there's been conversations about like how we could reshape this thing. And I've been interested in it, obviously from like Spotify days and beyond that. But now it seems like there's this emergent set of solutions that people are calling like the passion economy, where it's like the Substacks, the Patreons, the OnlyFans that, kind of bring back the glory days of like transactional media, where it was like, holy heck, like I sold a CD at a show and made $10 versus like I did, 10 streams of that album and made, 5 cents. Like, so all that is to say, yeah.
Is it like, but so the thing with that, right, is like, or I wonder like, is it scalable in a way, I guess, or is it kind of like, are you thinking like, how can you make that? I guess it is scalable because you make so much money on Patreon or like OnlyFans, but then it's also like, it also like locks you into that in a way, but then also it's like you have to be putting out the kind, it becomes like it's like a buyer's market in a weird way too,
totally,
right?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's some I don't think it's Andy Grove, but some like real startup like business head. It's like the only way to make money is through bundling and unbundling. And we just have these cycles, like there are all those memes floating around where it was like, wouldn't it be awesome if someone took Netflix and Hulu and ESPN Plus and and just put them into one thing where I could pay a lower premium? And you're like, oh yeah, that was cable. And we just unbundled it. And so I think you're going to have similar situation in this passion economy situation where it's really exciting. And there's like immediate kind of like sense of like acceleration, these returns that are meaningful. But then if you're late to the game, there are kind of these diminishing returns where you're creating all of this content and trying to compete. But I can only subscribe to 5 Substacks before I'm like maxed out with my budget. So I'm shifting through and trying to optimize. And there's kind of this long tail that's suffering. And so, the dream, I think, or what a lot of my peers are exploring, like what you're exploring, I think when we talk about this stuff is like, are there more collectivist solutions or approaches that allow people to not have to swim as fast as they can all the time? Like, is the reason organizations exist so that people can like ramp on and ramp off and they all kind of live under this umbrella where this content can live, and you're kind of buying into the brand versus this person that's just saying on a treadmill or whatever it is. So yeah, lots of thoughts about that.
Cool. No, yeah, I mean, I think it's like, well, yeah, because like I was starting to say, I think like I have been, I don't know, I think I've been trying to, it's interesting because my, like, I think I've always been, in the background I've always been sorry, it's like weird construction noise, but in the background I've always been interested in this stuff. And I think part of it for me came out of like, I think like going to Oberlin where there was like a really like intense like cooperative system, but also like my parents grew up in like a like this like big like socialist like co-op experiment in Queens kind of. It was like not super like edgy or whatever, but it was like but it had the same co-op principles as Oberlin, and so it was a kind of this weird through line. And then everyone just kind of did things in this sort of like collectivist way. And then like after graduating, I was like, oh, like this makes sense to me as the way to work and the way to like work, make things with your peers. But then like, of course, going into the art world and stuff, it was just like so not that. And I think I'm always like, okay, how do I get back to that vibe? But then also, I guess like since we've been talking more about this stuff with some of the projects that sort of like intersecting like network of like things that are going on. I've been trying to like think about it from a like larger scale historical perspective as well. And like, I guess like basically today I just was getting really deep into like anarchist like communalization or communization sort of like stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, this is like what this is. Like, yeah. It's like kind of, and then also just thinking about the larger, like for me, what's interesting too is like the philosophical implications around not only like the sort of practical abolition of a sort of capital relationship that we've taken for granted, but what that means also for like our understanding of ourselves as subjects. And like there's some intersection between like, this like sort of communal or like collectivized like creative production stuff and then like the Lil Miquela persona politics stuff that like I haven't yet figured out in my brain, but like I think there's like something interesting there. Like interactivity I think for a lot of people that means something else or something, where it's kind of like, oh, I touched it and it like, like, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I even think about like interactivity. My first experience with that word is like going to South by Southwest as a musician and then building kind of like the tech part, but not wanting to call it like the get tech money part. It was like South by Southwest interactive.
Right.
And I was like, and I guess that is broad enough that it was like gaming, it was kind of like, you know, consumer tech, enterprise tech, or whatever it was. But there, you know, my experience through all of this stuff is kind of like been, you know, kind of boomer millennial style, having these this repulsion towards words, you know, like influencer or interactive or whatever. And then like having to recognize that like, oh man, or even like the word creator, you know, like feels gross, but like more and more I'm like learning to own them and like embrace them in ways that I think young people are, where it's like influencer is an aspirational title, not entirely different than me wanting to be like a rock star or something.
Yeah.
I'm not that old. I don't want to be a rock star.
Like, no. Okay, well then back to these questions, because we've stayed on target a bit. But okay, so what's next for Brett?
You know, one thing, kind of back to narrative stuff, I've always thought a lot about the way traditional narrative and kind of like large narrative industrial complex is imposed upon us. And it's like you start with this long form narrative, traditionally like Star Wars, and then you turn that into like a video game, and then you turn that into a comic book, and then all the way it kind of gets atomized down to a lightsaber you can buy at Target. And you know, I always wanted to invert that model and kind of work in a more iterative, kind of more like software way, where you start with this like small piece of that long form and then work up the stack. And so think about our kind of play, it was like panel by panel storytelling on Instagram, like comic book style stuff. And then we slowly began to introduce video, and then kind of like really short form, almost like story content, and then music videos, and then vlogs. And eventually, you know, we're gonna have like television and film, and hopefully be able to kind of create television and film experiences that are more layered and provide more depth for fans than like the traditional experience. I always find it quite bizarre that like, I don't know, if you're a Gossip Girl super fan, there's kind of like this thick body of content that you can like mine for stuff and have a discourse around. But I think what's cool about the Kardashians, or like the Kardashian Jenner Wests, is that you have the kind of like keeping up with the Kardashian narratives, but then there are all these like sub narratives and like fragments, and you're like, what? Scott's dating Sophia Richie, and like, wait, her sister's Nicole Richie, and she's dating a Madden, and wait, he's into Charlotte. And like, you're just like,
yeah, it's like, yeah,
it's infinite.
I mean, yeah, that's an interesting thing too. I've been thinking a lot about that sort of, yeah, that like narrative and like film and media in relationship to the question of sort of like, I guess like the multiverse, or sort of like the, you know, kind of that. Like I was thinking, because I feel like everyone wants to make movies now. You know, it seems like it's like everybody's like, I want to make a movie. Like every artist is like, I want, you know, every kid, whatever. Maybe that's also just like America, and that's kind of like, you know, whatever. Like that's Hollywood is taken or whatever. But I think there's also this thing where it's almost like with the media ecosystem that we exist in, it's quite clear that like if you can make a movie or make like some sort of media narrative that then has the capacity to be scaled up to that you can like create your own world basically. And then if you do it in the sort of style of the Kardashians, or like, you know, I don't know another example, but like that you basically, what you're doing is like the way that we relate to images now, you're not just like, oh, I'm making this thing. You are creating like this whole like world that can be like, yeah, if you do it in one way, it'll just be 2-dimensional, but if you do it another way, it's like this whole thing out. And there's this like piece by this God, I don't know. It's a book, but it's like an epic poem also by this Renaissance thinker named Giordano Bruno, who was like burned at the stake during the like Copernican revolution, because he basically was like, no. Like Copernicus' discovery doesn't mean that like, you know, Earth is like this, you know, sun's following whatever. Like it's like, it means that there's a possibility for there to be infinite worlds in our universe. And like, it's this whole like crazy argument where basically it's just like there are no fixed points, like anything can be the center. And the way that he's talking about it is completely resonant with our time, but also it's interesting, like a lot of like 1970s experimental filmmakers like were really into him and wrote about how film was like a possible enactment of this, and that film doesn't represent our world, but it really just creates a new individual world, which I think is just like a really interesting, you know, on a philosophical level, that there's this shift, like this, you know, philosophy gets ahead of it, but then the world gets ahead of that, and we're kind of like entering some new moment. The thing that can signal it to us is like the desires people have, or it's like, oh, like you see people wanting certain things, and it's like that must mean something has shifted.
Well, it's funny because like where you were going, I kind of was like, I thought the stream would go to like a complete opposite path. Like, I do think a lot of my peers want to create film, you know, like kind of like my immediate kind of like similar age, similar kind of like, I don't know, cultural circles. Like I want to make a film, but then like my other kind of like chaotic, nerdy tech world in Discord land, like they want to create games, you know? And I always think like, I forget, this is where I'm just bad. The guy who directed The Godfather, do you remember that? I don't know.
Oh, Coppola? All right.
Yeah, Coppola, probably. Yes, Coppola. I think he was like, and when that film became popularized, he was like, man, you know, like since like the proliferation of cinema, we all have begun to view our lives as cinema, and like we're the main character in it.
Yeah.
And like, I oftentimes think that we've shifted from that mentality to like, we're all like this character in a giant MMORPG where we're like collecting likes and follows and kind of like transacting those for like side quests. Yeah.
And the other day I got COVID antibody test and I was like, and it came back positive and I was like, oh cool, I have antibodies. I was like, more noises. And like I got, and I was like, but I only had like 4, my antibody index was like 4 point something and my friend had like 52 antibodies and I was like, did I use up my I imagine them being like lives in a video game where I'm like, oh, like I like hung out with too many people, like my antibodies are gone. Anyway, it's completely unrelated.
No, but I think it's something really interesting there to explore, and that like, and at first I thought you were going to say like all of these people that want to make films like kind of want to be able to control their reality in a world that feels kind of like chaotic. But then actually, maybe it's the other way around where it's like, you know, like a bunch of like neurodivergent people are like more interested in kind of creating this open world where it is boundless, but it's actually fixed. Like there are a set of constraints. Mm-hmm. And then these other folks are kind of like, oh, we can have our own controlled realities, but gajillions of them that kind of know no bounds.
Right. Well, yeah, that's interesting in terms of the different personalities. I mean, like obviously, as you know, like I'm like want to make, you know, make and want to make film, whatever. Like that's my thing that I anyway. And so like, I feel like it's like I know I'm a control freak in a specific way that might, but also like I know that I'm a like it's interesting thinking. I guess I'm thinking about it as like people who excel in like, and this is not like one or the other, it's not like obviously two, but it's like, is there a difference between people who would like choose like sort of like software and like engineering sort of perspective, be able to think through building a world in that way versus someone who like really can only think, like I can't think anything but narratively in a lot of ways. And even the work that I make that's like anti-narrative, it's like, you know, kind of like trying to undo that, but then like kind of, yeah, I don't know, it's interesting. Like the sort of, it's different kinds of architectures, but the interesting thing too is like I do know I think like there's an interesting intersection between the two, right? Sort of like in-game like film or, you know, kind of like that sort of thing. And I don't know, but
no, I think it's worth exploring. I mean, I think we all have a couple questions left or whatever, but I think it's worth, I mean, like, I'm thinking about like further implications on like what we have ahead. Like it's clear we want to do like more narrative stuff with the Michaela stuff, and like film and television are really interesting. But I think beyond that, like expanding the universe of characters is absolutely the dream. You know, I think there's a world where we can kind of have characters that speak to all these different little cultural corners of the universe, no matter where you are in the world, and try to create like shared experiences that can bring people together. I definitely hope that's like a next step in, you know, this internet thing, is that we have some shared experience.
Are there right now?
Really, there's like, I would say like 5, but there's kind of like 3 robots and then like Kane Intelligence and Brud, our company. So we live in it in this kind of like WWE way as well.
Interesting.
Yeah. What should we wrap with? Was there anything exciting?
We didn't get to any of the sort of beauty and representation.
Oh yeah. That one's a really funny one. I think like we actually have a lot of conversations about this. It's like, you know, and it's like, that's another funny like timeline where it was like it was like, you know, she's so ugly, I hate her eyebrows with Michaela. And I was like, fuck, that sucks. Like, you know, like I think for a moment was able to embody like, you know, in some ways like the femme experience of being a public figure, where it was like, wow, like as a DJ, I never encountered that ever. You know, no one's ever like, your eyebrows suck. But then it kind of moved on to like, wow, I love, you know, that like her body type is atypical, or that like, you know, she looks ethnically ambiguous enough that I can see myself in it. And then it kind of moved along to like, wait a minute, are you stealing jobs from Black people? And I was like, wait, there's like lots of Black people anyways. And I, you know, they like, but like, I often appreciate the conversation. And I think, you know, the beauty representation piece is interesting to me because it seems like the most of the people that have a problem with that are like older, you know, like boomers, or like woke scolds, and like the kids are like very in on the joke and are very aware of Michaela not being real, and kind of like leverage that to kind of like journo bait, like bait journalistic, like Brooklyn blogger types, and kind of like fuck with them. And so I find it really intriguing to watch dynamics at hand. Like quickly, these people that think they're like young, savvy, hip folks are being like, you know, outmaneuvered by the Zoomers who are using their sensibilities to kind of like poke at them and have fun with them.
Well, it's also interesting because like I think it's like, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question of like labor involved in it, where it's also, I was thinking about this with regard to like some other stuff about like representation and like modeling the other day, where like, you know, people are like, we need more like XYZ like models, which is like, yeah, true. Like these, you know, industries should be opened up to people who have like, you know, variety of body types, like, you know, identity, like whatever. But at the same time, it's also because like the specific like framework of modeling is also like, we need more people of this type, like a different type of body to be able to be the product. Like, you know what I mean? Like the most like crystallized way, which is, and it's true of any like, you know, labor dynamic, but it's like a really particular representation of this like larger thing, and how everyone's kind of like buying to. So there's this funny thing, people are like, how dare little Michaela take that, you know, modeling job that I certainly would have gotten were it not for her. It's kind of this funny thing too, where it's like, well, isn't there something interesting about, I mean, I guess it goes back to it's even like an automation argument about like labor, where it's like, well, if you like give that job to like an artificial intelligence, then like people don't have to be packaged alongside products in the same way. But also like they do, but also she's kind of a person, and it just becomes like a mess. And it's really interesting to watch people like not have the tools really, and the tools are out there, I think, but it's funny to really see how the discourse isn't pulling from like, you know, a lot of like all the like post-humanist or like just like internet, you know, like media theory from like the 90s onward that like, you know, very much has figured out a number of ways through this territory. People are just like, I don't really know, like it's like so confusing, and get upset. But
yeah, no, I think there's something, I actually hadn't really thought about that too much, but you're absolutely right. This idea of like, you know, my friends who are models like 2000 were like, I'm a coat hanger, you know, that they kind of like joke at how disembodied or kind of like how literally like commodity or product like their jobs were.
Yeah.
And this like idea of like weaponizing like academic language, or like, you know, the language of like empowerment to become like a product or like a commodity is like,
which again, it goes back to the and as a closing thing or something, but like it goes back to that issue just of like, if in this world you are always already a commodity, like is your best shot to like resist that and try to find ways around it, or to make choices where you give yourself over to certain elements of that, and like, you know, one could say like, you know, accelerate through it, or, you know, just make your peace, survive. Like, I don't know, there's like all these different ways to try to make it there.
Yeah, so with that, no conclusions, but hey, warm nihilism, let's get it, baby.
Amazing. Thank you both. Thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Arya. That was an incredible conversation. I think I was taking some notes on the side, and I was like, whoa, we are going like around the world 10 times. Super cool.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. No, thank you both so much. This was really fascinating. I like warm nihilism, the multiverse, nonlinear storytelling, you know, flipping the creation process. I guess just to quickly close, I want to ask you both a question. So we've talked about a lot of different things, and I want to do one sort of call to action. You're both really well regarded and deeply passionate in your respective fields. The folks in our audience are going to be a broad spectrum of folks from like the university community as well as the innovation community at large. If you could sort of have one call to action, what would that be? I know that was, I mean, it's like a serious,
I know what mine is, but like, it's going to sound like a joke, but it's like, it's earnest.
Yeah.
You can build like, I don't know, like with your friends and like do like, I don't know, all that seems like that was what came to mind.
Yeah, literally mine feels like that disingenuous as well, but like totally earnest, like be polite, have manners, like be kind to people. Like I feel like the simple stuff is the important stuff. Be nice to service workers.
Yeah.
So true. Let that karma like flow back around. Awesome. And okay, one last thing. We've talked a lot about different sort of references and sort of like big ideas, philosophers, companies, platforms. If you could make a nod or ask people to check out one thing, what would that be? What's like the cool thing what's the interesting thing that you're really excited about that you think people should know about?
Oh, this is where I should plug. I have a cool little community called Friends with Benefits. It's www.fwb.help for information. And a lot of my favorite thinkers are in there and having conversations that are kind of all approached in good faith. And I think you should check it out and come join us.
And I guess the thing I should plug is that I have a magazine that I started with some friends and colleagues called November Magazine. That a lot of these ideas are, right now it's an interview platform basically. I did an interview with Frank Wilderson, who's like my favorite theorist of all time, probably, or favorite living theorist. But it's going to turn over into becoming like a more fleshed out, full-on magazine project, and a lot of these ideas will be worked through for sure in that. So check that out.
Awesome.
I guess it's like a self-serving plug. I'm trying to think of something that I don't have anything to do with.
I'm trying to think of like a good or like a point of entry. Like if not that, I don't know, like Adam Curtis or something. Those are easy and like kind of fun.
Read all of Mark Fisher's K-punk blog. Front back. I don't know. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. With that, thank you both so much. Thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Aria. Thank you. All right, next up, we are so excited to feature 3 incredible companies exploring really exciting applications of the future of visual and immersive experiences. Today, we have with us the creators and founders of Rosebud AI, Sensorium, and Scatter. I'm going to turn it over to my awesome colleague, Abron, to take it away.
Thank you so much, Erica. I'm really excited for this one. I'm a geek myself, along with everybody else who really enjoys immersive media, VR, AR, mixed reality. And to be honest, we're all waiting, right? We're waiting to see when does it reach that level where we know it can mirror what we get from our televisions, our phones, and from the theaters. And I think we're close, and I think we're there. So we're going to have presentations today by 3 great creatives in this space. And we're going to start with Leisha. And then after the presentations, we're going to go into a larger discussion around the medium, where it's headed in the future, and where we are now. So Leisha, if you could take it over from here.
All right, thank you. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for inviting me to participate. I'm Alicia, and we are Rosebud AI. So what we do is enable virtual production for digital talent on demand. I'll go into exactly what that means, but some of the motivations are the problems that we're trying to solve, which are fairly obvious facts. So one, video and photo shoots are costly. They are also slow and time consuming to create. And finally, there's also a very timely need for a remote friendly production process, especially right now. So what we do is we specialize in creating digital media of virtual talent on demand. And this could be somebody's digital double, or it could be completely based on, beings that don't exist. And so a lot of my background comes from research in deep learning, and in particular, GANs, generative adversarial networks, that are responsible for some of the more wacky results in deep fakes that you see in the media. And I also spent some time in venture capital. And so I saw an opportunity where there was a lot of, I think, creative augmentation potential in a lot of the tools here. So aside from, I guess, some of the more dystopian use cases, I really wanted to sit in the front seat to mold it towards more creative ones. And so what we're building is supposed to address some of these problems. So on-demand creation, editing of photos, focusing on virtual talent, so faces and people, and to make it affordable and accessible for just, I guess, more small business owners. See it as really putting the tools of like advanced production processes to sort of more hands. And finally, I think just an interesting kind of thing of the times is that this happens also to be fairly pandemic proof. And so we've seen more organic interest as a result of COVID, just because a lot of the more physical based processes aren't possible right now. So what was a nice to have has evolved more towards a need to have. And so some of the vision that really kind of drives us and makes us really passionate about this stuff is, think of it as like enabling storytelling at the speed of thought. So creating visuals, creating characters. If you can sort of do this in an on-demand process, you're really enabling people to tell stories much more with less friction. So that's kind of what we're motivated by. So, okay, now just to share some visuals and videos of our products. First thing we launched last year was this thing called Generative Photos. It is a web app where we do on-demand generation of these photos, mainly based on like the faces and creating attributes for the face that correspond to what brand owners and marketers really want. It's a virtual process, obviously. It's done with deep learning. And one of the value props that we discovered for a lot of these people is that they didn't want to end up using the same stock models as a lot of other companies, especially their competitors, which is a shockingly kind of common thing that happens, at least with startups. It's available at app.generative.photos. And this is a quick GIF of how the app actually works. So you can go in there and start altering kind of on demand of any photo that you submit and upload. Here's some more examples of V1 of the product where we, fixed on several identities that we can kind of directionally change a photo towards. Starting with photos really allowed us to learn better what customers wanted to control. And so, going back to the vision of like, what is, like some storytelling at the speed of thought, we also wanted to take our learnings to full body shots. And so there was an obvious other application within fashion that we got some demand on, and so we started training models to generate the entire body. And so this is the virtual model product. Value prop is fairly obvious for the retail industry, as it's faster time to market. Again, and here are some examples of how that works. You can customize the faces. And then more recently, we jumped onto videos, and it's a very kind of logical step in our pipeline, because by focusing on people and creating virtual beings, a lot of the same processes and architectures that we use for generating photos can be moved into video. And so after we gained learnings about the kind of control that people are care about in terms of their creations, that then can be optimized in the process for creating videos. And so this is a project which we called Humans of AI, and how I got connected with Vernon on is sort of this collaborative fiction. We had access to the GPT-3 API, and so I decided to create these prompts for just fictional characters. And because there was text, we can actually use this new video generation pipeline that we've designed, where can create a new face with the original photo product, use the text, and then actually feed into
the Sikh religion is a very straightforward path to peace. Our gurus teach that there is only one God, and no one can reach God but God himself. And that's the truth. Nothing can happen that is outside the will of God. If you're sick and you die, it's God's will. If you're healthy and alive, it's God's will. So every time I go to the doctor, I thank him for keeping me alive.
So yeah, you can learn more about the project at rosebud.ai, but none of the text was human written, and this is just kind of to serve, I mean, obviously it was trained on data that was written by humans, and so it was very interesting to just kind of feed it prompts that were very similar to the Humans of New York project, and see what it dreams up, and then pair it with the visuals, because, you know, we're all very visual beings, and so being able to animate it has kind of given it new dimension. I think also what was interesting about this is then some of the inbound for a new video product has come from very, I think, creative and artistic backgrounds. And so even things that we wouldn't have thought about, which, you know, include maybe film directors who wanted to just scope out an initial kind of like a reading of their script, like this kind of technology really kind of showed them that, okay, maybe I can do that on demand in a not very, you know, like obviously this is not in the end production product, but it really helped them kind of imagine how their characters should look like. And so combining our ability to make faces with the ability to animate them, so enabled that kind of process. Here's another example. Again, this is kind of interesting and I guess in a more thought-provoking way. So this one generated something about a cop, and he's, you know, also—
I'm a cop. It's my job to serve and protect, but it's been a long time since I've been able to do that. I used to see people trying to help each other. It was an honor to serve and protect them. And to see them, you'd think they were more—
You know, Ron's also generated some characters as well, so you should check that out. And so finally, you know, this alludes to what Talking Heads was also originally envisioned to do. Some people who wanted it for instructional videos and promotional videos. So here's
This elegant entertainer's dream home is available for private showings this weekend. 5 bedrooms, 3 full bathrooms, and a half bathroom with detached guest cottage on a sunny and—
So this is still in private beta, and what we're trying to do is also include the full body into the generation, because, you know, very rarely do we have just the head speaking to you. But yeah. And then lastly, just for fun, we've released a lower dimensional or lower resolution consumer version of this app, and to sort of combat any malicious use cases, there's more caricatures of political figures that you can find on talkingheads.com. But here's an example where you can just actually input not text but audio and get it to sync automatically to a photo.
Enough guy, just always so puff guy. I'm that bad type, make your mama sad type, make your girlfriend mad type.
Yeah, and so I get a chuckle out of this, but I think actually one of the other speakers in this conference is the creator of Lil Michaela. So yeah, I think just anything where people are trying to tell stories with either virtual or real personas, this can be a tool in their arsenal. Oh, and finally, just to show the more examples of like real audio clips, Lana Del Rey released some read poetry in audio form, and so if you can actually just pair it with her face, and it generates this more guess, video dream.
I left my city for San Francisco. Took a free ride off a billionaire's jet. LA, I'm from nowhere, who am I to love you? LA, I've got nothing, who am I to love you when I'm feeling this way and I've got nothing to offer?
So as you can see, the video product is still in its, especially the consumer version, they're in nascent stages, but we're honing on it fast, and I think there's a lot of interesting use cases that can help creators here. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Leisha. That was great. Yes, we did meet through this program. I'm part of your beta, and I've had a lot of fun with it, and also trying to create representations and people of color in there, just get representations in there. So thank you. I have a ton of questions. I know Erica does too, but we're going to save it for the end and have a larger discussion. I'm sure the guys have questions as well. But we're going to move on to the next presenter. So thank you again for that. And next up, we have Matt. Matt, take it away.
My name is Matthew Niederhauser. I am a co-founder of Sensorium along with John Fitzgerald. We are an experiential studio that focuses especially on XR development and are really into experiences that transcend physical and digital spaces. I'm going to be sort of presenting two projects. One that was recently premiered at Sundance called Metamorphic, that was created along with Wesley Alsbrook, Ellie Zananiri, and John Fitzgerald. And then another one that sort of dovetails a little bit more into how we're thinking about artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I'll just go ahead and dive straight into Metamorphic, which is sort of one of our, a project produced out of the studio that we're really interested in taking into directions that would incorporate machine learning and other sort of artificially intelligent technologies. So Metamorphic is this experience that was initially premiered as a social experience between two people that was based off of the artwork of Wesley Alsbrook. And she is this incredible illustrator, painter, drawer who can create these amazing worlds in 3D. And we really tried to put something together where it felt like you embodied her characters, and then through interaction in a shared virtual space, we're able to body swap. I'll sort of try to break down what that means, but I'm going to show a trailer first that also includes the excellent music of Tim Fain. Essentially what we were doing was taking these quill assets done by Wesley into Unity, and then created a back-end system where we could dynamically sort of draw them on and off. Ellie Zananiri made a complete system where essentially we could control how these environments would sort of come in around you dynamically. And this was super important in terms of how we introduced the participants to sort of the environment, and also that it was like dynamic and malleable. But also, as you'll sort of see in a second, it really also had to, was used to play with people's sense of embodiment. So not only were you moving around this world where interactivity could potentially draw or undraw certain environmental elements, it was also could change how your own appearance looked. So we dynamically rigged quill assets up through Houdini, and then based on your interaction with the environment or other characters or people, you would actually take on their aesthetic appearance, essentially having this ability to body swap as you move through an experience. So this is actually in headset, and at the beginning of the experience, we open it up by sort of introducing yourself to your new body, and this is like in a fully tracked environment. And so you're slowly watching your new sort of avatar be drawn onto you dynamically. This is some footage from our Sundance installation where you can also see that we initially split the split the participants in half. And you sort of first introduce them to their new form. And then after that, you started introducing environmental elements that if you interacted with, would take on new appearances and sort of switch between the different worlds. And then at that point, we would draw the curtain, and they would potentially then realize that they were in the same virtual space together. And this was always like a first really amazing moment when they realized that the physical boundary was gone and that they could interact with each other in the virtual space, and was sort of like the first eye-opener, and usually got these really amazing sort of reactions. The second major element, and what I want to talk about more, is that we'd have these sort of, we called them fakers, but they were digital avatars coming into the space that would sort of react to you and also try to like approach and interact with you. And eventually there was even like a third surprise element. We'd send in a third person in the mocap suit as well. And all of a sudden there would be like a third physical person in the space. And we're sort of essentially trying to play with what you feel is like, you know, real or virtual, what's in your physical space, what's not. And then there's a very sort of dramatic visual ending where the world eventually undraws itself. But one of the, even though we had a ton of great reactions from the experience at Sundance, and this is obviously something we have to pivot to in this new world where we can't do installations like this, but we are trying to think about what it means to engage people in virtual spaces, and especially about consent and how to empower people who potentially don't know how they're going to encounter people in a virtual space. And this is also especially important for sort of our digital characters, our fakers. This is sort of going back to them. And you know, how we are trying to discover some ways of potentially having some machine learning algorithms or some understanding of intent of whether or not somebody wants to engage with these sort of digital characters or not. And it's a major concern right now is sometimes people don't want to interact with these people, and how can we understand that dynamically within the experience itself? And it's still one of the hardest things to take into consideration is how somebody is reacting to the experience, and you know, being able to understand to sort of take care so that we're not hurting anybody, and also that people have sort of full consent in terms of how they're interacting both with real and digital characters. And in that sense, we're trying to think about how we can gather data sets or look at what are physical poses or reactions that can be dynamically understood, and in some ways try to control digital characters so that they react better to the participants. And I think this is something that's super important, not just for a singular art piece like this, but in larger virtual shared social settings that include digital avatars and actors. This is an experience we're now turning into a single player experience, and we're trying to figure out some ways to also create it so it can be networked online. But we've obviously had to pivot how we're thinking about this, because in January, we're going to try to take it and do installations all over the world with it. And a lot of cultural institutions obviously are not going for that right now.
It reminds me actually of GPT-3. I don't know how much you've explored that with your work, but I think the narrative might be something that you should explore further to build out, Luca. We could talk about that offline or in the community chat.
Totally. That would be an essential technology that we've used to drive the natural language processing. And it's also why we're excited to pick this up again. This deck really started in 2017, and it's been in the past 6 months that we're starting to reapproach it again.
It's all about timing, right?
Because of the accessibility. Yeah. So anyway, very nebulous. It's not created, but it's something that we're using as a project to investigate digital agents and how we sort of create relationships with them, and through data algorithms and data collection. And awesome. It's just a very interesting time for all that. So and that's being created with Mark DaCosta, and we also do lots of other crazy things at Sensorium and are always open to any type of fun, awesome projects.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We're going to touch on some of that a bit in the discussion portion. Thank you again, Matt. Alex, if you're ready to go, I'll turn it over to you to wrap up the presentation portion, and then we can jump into a bit of discussion.
Hi, I'm Alexander Porter. I'm a co-founder at Scatter. So Scatter, we're based here in New York City, in Brooklyn, and our studios are in Bushwick. And my co-founders and my team, we're all an interdisciplinary group of artists and engineers. And we think of ourselves as a team responsible for defining and for enabling a new discipline that we call volumetric filmmaking. With our first product and our product line Depth Kit, which is the most widely used tool for creating holograms and virtual experiences with real human beings. So volumetric filmmaking to us is a entirely new discipline that has essentially driven our work from the beginning. It's a new genre in immersive media and in virtual representation. So the way we think about it, it's sort of a marriage between film and video games. And what's unique about it is that it combines the kind of the freedom, the dynamism, the ability to explore that's present in the context of games and game engines, with the kind of the craft and the sensibility and the impact of filmmaking. So what that enables to us is it allows you to take stories told by real people, present in real places, and start to expand them into virtual spaces. And increasingly, it's our belief that these are the kinds of tools that we need to be able to use in order to tell the stories of the level of complexity that are happening now in the world. And it ultimately allows you then, as a user or a viewer of these experiences, to physically find yourself and feel your own body or presence inside of these experiences, allowing you to walk through the environments where these stories are taking place, or allowing us to create worlds that are as immersive and as profound as our real world. And one critical philosophy that we have at Scatter is that we use these tools to tell stories that we feel cannot be told in any other way. And for us, that ends up being often nonfiction stories or contemporary stories dealing with the issues of our moment. So at Scatter, when we define our work and when we consider what we're doing, we have essentially three main pillars. The because the way we think about our work is, it's quite large. It's a big task in the sense that our goal is really to enable and define an entirely new medium, an entirely new format, and a new form. And so when we're doing that as a company, we celebrate the hybridity I mentioned earlier. And we do that by inspiring other projects or other teams or creators, students, etc., by creating what we consider to be inspiring or meaningful work that is contemporary, work that is political, work that's important. The second pillar for us is about enablement. So for us, it's actually meaningless if we inspire external teams if we can't then follow up and enable them to join us, to participate, to contribute to the same dialogue and the same conversation. And then, given that we are all working at the fringe of a new set of technologies, at the fringe of a new set of creative forms, it's critical to have community, to have support, to have mutual relationships and mutual aid to allow you to actually sustainably create in this way. So for us, that third pillar is about enabling and creating community. Inclusive spaces where creators can discover and create together. So in our work, we lead with our original volumetric and immersive and XR virtual reality content. I'm going to just sort of gloss over this. This could be a whole conversation, obviously. And I've shown a few of our projects here that go back all the way back to 2014. Clouds was released and shown at MoMA, at the Sundance Film Festival, 2014. Very much the first volumetric film in this space. My kind of directorial debut in terms of virtual reality was a project called Blackout, the third one. It's really the first volumetric documentary experience that allows you to physically walk around inside the space, which we premiered at Tribeca Film Festival in 2017. And there's another project, 0 Days VR, for which we won an Emmy actually 2 years ago yesterday in News and Documentaries, which is the story of the Stuxnet computer virus and the United States' role in unleashing what we consider to be essentially a whole new phase in global politics and global warfare, which we are kind of encountering today. So these are our projects. And then the last one is a project called Changing Same, which is in production right now, which is a collaboration with the Rada Film Group. So when we set out to make these projects, and when we really found our voice in creating in this way, there were no tools that pre-existed. There was no way to make these projects possible. And so in order to start creating, we very much had to create our own tools. And the first tool, and this is, as I was mentioning earlier, this is sort of that pillar of enablement. That first tool that we created is called DepthKit. And what it allows a creator to do is to film in virtual reality using off-the-shelf hardware like an Azure Connect or a Intel RealSense to create and capture human performances and present them in three-dimensional spaces, as I mentioned before. So it's quite approachable from a production standpoint. It can be as simple as what I'm showing here, which is, you can see on the right, it's a cinema camera paired with, in this case, an Azure Connect, which is a Microsoft product that's relatively affordable. And it allows you to film at length and to post-process and then ultimately present that form in whatever context makes most sense. And so oftentimes projects will get presented inside video game engines, like Unity is a common one, on the web, in mobile applications, or even just embedded into feature films, into visual effects contexts. And one thing I'll point out in this kind of this looping GIF here, it represents a philosophy that we have, which is that when we think about these tools, it's critical to us that we are enabling both the kind of photorealistic, the kind of real presence, the real presence of a human being, to enable kind of straightforward and powerful or documentary stories, and also the surreal, the dreamlike, the kind of magical as well. because it's our view that when you start to talk about virtual creation, you start to have to deal with the kind of internal spaces of people as well. And when we remember or when we imagine or dream, it's not always photorealistic. And so it's important to us that with our tools, we're always managing that scope. So I'm going to kind of introduce you to a few products that we have kind of out now or available now. And the first one is a tool called DepthKit Cinema. And DepthKit Cinema is a tool that allows you to create these full, lush kind of holograms at up to 8K resolution, 8,000 pixels across using cinema cameras. It's really, it enables creators to integrate their existing tools, specifically filmmakers, to work with their existing tools and allowing them to use those exact same assets in entirely new forms and spaces. And so for us, the dream is really that we can create tools that allow people who have existing mastery in tools like the camera or in disciplines like filmmaking or cinema to enable teams like that to really step into an entirely new world. And what that world often looks like is this. So this is a collaboration we did with Imogen Heap and the Wave VR that allowed them to create a virtual, live streamed concert presented both in a kind of live stream format like this and also in virtual reality, presenting Imogen Heap controlling the sort of environment around her in this surreal and supernatural way. And what enables that is our integration, deep integration with the game engine Unity and new capabilities inside of Unity, like the visual effects graph or the shader graph, which take very complex challenges that even a few years ago were the skills to manipulate geometry and computer graphics in this way was quite rarefied and ultimately then quite expensive. And there's very much a kind of Cambrian explosion in terms of the accessibility of tools that can create dynamic and gorgeous atmospheres and experiences like this one here. So there's something I want to share with you that I'm quite excited about, which is our kind of very latest project, which is a tool set that we're calling DepthKit Studio, and we're just putting it into a pilot right now. And yes, that is me, and this is just a sort of quick experiment I did. But specifically, it allows you to not only create captures from the front. You would have seen in the presentation that many of these performances were almost like a relief, like a single view relief. And in this case, it allows you to create full human beings and walk around them, very much in the way that we initially previewed in the project Blackout that I described earlier. So we would encourage anyone watching this to join our pilot. We have a lot of interest and a lot of engagement with this right now, and we are trying to create a really vibrant and really creative group as a kind of pilot group while we roll this out more widely to the world. So essentially, in conclusion, I want to share that, like, as a human being doing this work, it's a lot. We are a very small team, and we've taken on an extraordinary amount. And what gives me life is the fact that people are using our tools to create absolutely extraordinary works. So I'm showing you here, there are literally hundreds of holographic apps and experiences that have been created with DepthKit without even getting into the films and short films and visual effects. You can see a full list of these on our website, but I really encourage you to find a way to have direct encounters with this kind of work. You go to our website, see this list, download these experiences. The Sensorium team have created some of the pinnacle experiences in this space. I think we might have some on here. But go see them and kind of develop your own kind of direct encounter with what this stuff is, because it's profound, it's unique, and it's very new. And the only thing I'll point out here is we're very excited that right in the middle of the top row here, there's an incredible project called Awavana that just won an Emmy, again, just a few days ago in news and documentaries. And it's an incredible experience, and it's available to download. So I encourage you to go see that. So the last pillar, as I mentioned, is community. As I said, we are all dealing with an incredible amount in the creative space, in the technical space, running companies in an entirely new domain. And it's critical to have community. So I'm just putting some links up here. Feel free to join us. We have an extraordinary meetup that we do regularly in collaboration with Bill Platt at CNN. We've done most recently with Vimeo or Time Warner, et cetera. So this is a sort of a place where people get together, now virtually, obviously not in real life. So I would encourage you to follow that or join our kind of online community and share what you're intending to make, build teams, et cetera. So I just wanted to thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm very excited to take part in this conversation. It's incredibly gratifying to be in a context like this where we can share our work. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Alex. This was great. And again, to the audience, if there's any questions that maybe you wanted to ask or you wanted us to ask that we don't get to because of time, you can carry over that into the chat in the Whova app for this session. So I encourage everyone to join that conversation, the presenters as well, to jump into the chat to engage with the audience and have them pick your brains as well. This question is across the board for everyone. So I've been paying attention to this space as we all have been. And I feel like it's still about us who are doing the work of finding this. But when does it get to the normal entertainment consumer? When does it get to a point, are we waiting for new hardware or software to come out to where a family can go out and participate in like a full feature? These are shorts, right? A full length feature, a 2-hour film without needing an eye break or without noticing the generative media elements. Are we there yet, or are we still waiting for certain technology advancements? And now this is across the board. Anyone can answer.
I think it's a great question. There's before answering it, I'll caution about one thing, which is when we make too many comparisons to sort of old media, for example, the concept of a feature duration, I think we're missing the fact that there's new forms, there's new formats, there's new encounters and new experiences that are emerging, which should be different. So oftentimes we kind of fall into this all the time. We kind of use those traditions as almost like a crutch. And so it's really important to, as I mentioned in the presentation, to develop direct encounters with this work and ask yourself, in the way that a feature film feels complete at the, whatever the sort of hour and a half duration, do these things feel complete on their own? So I would sort of say, in many cases, the really extraordinary work, well, in some cases, they can be relatively short, and there's different formats emerging, whether formats that are suited for festivals or formats that are suited for distribution. I would encourage you to kind of watch them and ask yourself, does this feel like a complete work? And I will say that the creative community is evolving to an extraordinary degree, and there are masterpieces out there that exist already.
Yeah, no, that's great. Great answer. Thank you.
Yeah,
Erica, do you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. Does anyone else want to jump in?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that that it's definitely sort of occurring right now for sure, and as Alex said, it's this new amalgamation of these different mediums, especially if you look at like the movement away from like a passive medium like theater or cinema into gaming and also immersive theater, and that these are occurring right now. And I think one of the best websites tracking things that you can participate in, and obviously COVID has dampened a lot of these efforts, but is through No Proscenium, where I think that it's an excellent list for cities where you can actually go and engage immersive experiences that incorporate, things that might have narrative structure from a movie, or the interactivity you might get from a game, or sort of like the co-presence that comes from immersive theater. So there's these strange amalgamations that are occurring that, I think at its best still have these real physical components and augmented, virtual components, and how that plays out is what makes it so interesting to participate in this field right now. That's because there isn't a feature, for this type of work, and it's super diverse in terms of how it's manifested.
Yeah, it's not apples to apples.
Yeah.
Totally.
I agree. I think in terms of our approach and what excites us about our sort of how users can engage is, really focusing on making it immediate and on demand. And so a lot of short form and things in digital media where, you do need that for kind of interaction and adaptive experiences. Would love for people to play with that are very, very much a departure from older templates of like media.
Yeah.
Agreed. I think we have some really interesting sort of themes around scaling and doing so safely and ethically. This is for everyone, but I'd love to start with Leisha. So, your work really focuses on generative media and deep fakes. How do you think we can scale this safely and ethically?
Yeah, no, I think it's like an ongoing conversation evolution. I mean, there's like so many points here. I mean, first of all, releasing something on the consumer side, you want to make sure that people can't use this for like, obvious like political deep fake reasons. I mean, we've sort of geared that towards like, how do we think about the interface and the kind of inputs that people can put in so that they can't, like repurpose it for something else. The other thing is like, for some of our earlier products, we've geared it towards enterprise. And so some of the choices where we've used it for, say, marketing and retail purposes was that we would gain the same kind of like learnings about the technology, but at least it would be priced in a way that wasn't just like, you can, use it to generate deep fakes of Donald Trump or, Joe Biden, et cetera. So there's kind of like a pricing discrimination there. But I think there's also more subtle points about like, okay, who gets to use, say, this tech in terms of like in a representative way, in a diverse way. To what extent is it kind of like misuse versus actually you're trying to be representative? And I think in that case, I've taken an approach of like really listening to the users and like what are they, what are the intents there? And so I think what's interesting is sometimes it's actually going in a direction where, because you've made it more accessible, because you've made it sort of like technology, and by accessible I mean like it's cheaper so that like smaller brand owners can use it, or artists who don't have huge budgets can use it. I mean, then it's like much more of an expressive medium. And so I try to, at least since we're in our earlier stages, we can really kind of have a one-to-one correspondence with the users and make sure we're really serving like a more benign purpose.
That's a really great point. We totally agree. I think across all of your projects today, we saw this sort of like paradigm shift between creator and consumer and audience. So I guess, how are we reimagining this sort of interactive nature of storytelling? How do you think your sort of project sort of flipped the script or sort of really push the bounds on that?
Is this directed at me?
For everyone, yeah. You start, Leisha, yeah.
Maybe one way that I kind of like catch it is like I'm decoupling. I mean, the tech that I'm working on really focuses on virtual personas and like ways to represent the digital self. And I see it as like an opportunity to decouple like how somebody looks to like the way that they want to express themselves, which is, obviously open to like more dystopian like use cases. But I think the exciting part is like, okay, it actually can make things more freeing. And so in some ways, the way that we sort of communicate digitally is extremely rich, and if we can kind of have a very flexible way of just like representing ourselves in very fluid, I guess like physical manifestations, I think that allows creators who want to tell different stories to kind of just have a lot more of a flexible instrument. So just to ground into something, I think very concrete. So there's this like phenomenon of like a virtual celebrity, right? I think Lil Miquela is an example. There's like the virtual YouTubers from Japan that are on the rise. I think that all can like fall under the framework of like decoupling the persona from like the team that makes it. And so it's like, if you're kind of a comedic talent or a musical talent, but you don't want to use yourself as like the puppet for the or even if you don't feel like that is like the most true way that it represents the content you're creating, now there are tools that you can use to do that, which are like a lot more accessible. They're more frictionless. And I think this kind of generative media really opens up exploration in that realm. So that's what's most exciting for me about this area.
It's interesting. I feel, Alicia, that we're almost in opposites in terms of the ways that we're working. A lot of what we're doing is really about taking the sort of specificity of kind of conventional filmmaking, where there's this sort of relationship between you can really sense that the person was present during the capture. And in very many ways, it's kind of a traditional, it's a very kind of almost like antique and traditional approach, where we a lot of the most profound projects we find are really meaningful because you can really tell that a person was really there, right? It's like, you know, it's kind of, it's like the documentary sensibility. And one of the things that's really important to us, and kind of getting back to the question of ethics, we have customers that are the biggest companies in the world, but essentially without exception, the most important stories for this moment are not coming from those companies. And it's our view that the most important stories are coming from other places. And what we're dealing with as a wider culture in the world right now, in terms of inequities around healthcare, policing, et cetera, when we think about the kind of next generation of interactive stories, we go out and we do really, it's a lot of work actually to sort of reach out into communities and make sure that our tools are legible, available, it's affordable, et cetera, for people to tell new stories. And I'll give you one example of that, specifically dealing with this question of interactivity and kind of verisimilitude, or sort of like the sense of a real person being present. One of my favorite projects, sorry, Matthew. One of my favorite projects is a project called Fireflies of Brownsville, which is an extraordinary project that was created. What's that?
It's a great name.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary project, and obviously Brownsville is a neighborhood here in Brooklyn, and the project was made out of a community center in Brownsville, where specifically they're dealing with the kind of entrenched kind of feud between basically communities in two different housing projects. And the teens, they were teens then, that are working on the project, were really adamant that when they're representing people, that they feel grounded and they feel real. And so they were specifically trying to build bridges in a virtual space between people that were ultimately not really seeing each other face to face. And what's meaningful there is that they were able to make this one-to-one representation basically of their neighborhood, and enable kind of navigations and journeys and traversals through that neighborhood that they are not safely, in some cases, able to do themselves. And so in that case, they're making a virtual and an interactive experience where it really matters that those are specific people, and they are then able to listen in a way that ultimately they're not necessarily doing in their general life. And so I think when we think about these emergent kind of opportunities around interactivity, those are the kinds of things that are really exciting to me, because it's not something I would have generated on my own.
And I'd say from a creator standpoint, even though Alex sort of showed how there might be a different approach from the tools that they're creating, I'm excited because I see different possibilities for both of their technologies, where I'm like, oh, like this is when you approach a subject, or a narrative, you almost need to understand what technology is the most appropriate to try to like convey a message. And I think that's what I've already sort of said about it. It's so amazing about the potential diversity, not just in terms of stories being told, but how they're being told, and all very, relevant and important. And, we all know how to like sit in a dark theater and watch a film together, you know what I mean? And that was a very ubiquitous, common thing. But there's just such an explosion of opportunity to mix and match. Or what happens if I, take a deep fake generated avatar and make it speak at and react to a depth kit asset, you know what I mean? And like, what does that conversation look like? And that's, what's so exciting. And, I'm not gonna lie, it is a little bit scary at the same time for some people. I mean, I have a sort of cautious optimism about, I try to about in life in general. But, social media and a lot of technology has delivered us a really crazy 2020, you know what I mean? And it's something that's gonna be hard to get over a little bit. But I don't know, I feel that this generation of tools and like stories that are coming out are being distributed to just like a much wider audience, and the inception of almost any type of major storytelling medium. Like cinema, for decades, you couldn't access the tools to create those stories, and it defined the medium in a very important way. But I see through festivals, the some people in the industry and, the creator studios, there's a really interesting diversity in voices and ways of telling the story that is going to hopefully take us into a new and more interesting direction.
Totally agree. Thank you, everyone. I think we've got time for one final closing question.
Yeah, so obviously, Matt and Alex, you guys are familiar with each other's work. I've worked with Alicia in the past, and this community is a small one at that. But are there others in the space that inspire you that you've looked forward to working with? And maybe there might be other people in this conference that you might be interested in collaborating with.
I can kick it off. One of my favorite collaborators I haven't worked with in a while are Neil Harbison and Moon Rivas, who are these cyborg artists based out of Barcelona. We've done interesting projects with them in the past, and they're really pioneering technology as being able to create new senses for your body. And then if you have new senses, it unlocks new artistic mediums. I mean, I think this is something that's getting into a really crazy area, especially, listen to the Blessed or Not with someone like Elon Musk, like something like Neuralink, and, what's that going to mean? And how do you turn that, usually when you're given a new sense, it creates new art. We've also been working closely with a really amazing artist named Stephanie Dinkins. Not super closely recently, but we've helped run a recent project that utilized DepthKit, and she's just doing really fascinating investigations into AI and machine learning, and definitely always suggest checking out her work.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else?
I'll give a shout out to Artbreeder. It's another platform where you can generate, both landscapes and a way to kind of sort of dream up and mix together images that are basically products of StyleGAN. But it's made by Joel Simon. I think I just love the way that they thought about interfaces there and how to mix together different elements of stuff. And also one interesting way I've seen people use it is they would create these fantasy characters through Artbreeder, and then you can pipe it into talking heads and then make it speak, so you can animate the character. So I'd love to see what people can create with a combination.
That's great.
I have one to share, which is we have kind of a long-standing initiative that we call Volumetric Histories, which is really about this continuing to kind of delve at this question of how to tell the most important contemporary stories. And I have this distinct experience that we're living through a historic moment right now, and so the sort of challenge for us right now is are there ways to in a dignified and also really powerful way actually kind of aggregate and tell the stories in a diverse and an appropriate way. And so we have an initiative that we're working on with the Museum of the Moving Image right now, and funded by the Knight Foundation, and I'm very excited about the moment we're in, which is obviously we had to adapt that project, which was going to be an installation, and the question of really how to do that with kind of dignity and to capture just the pure insanity of this moment. I'm excited about that challenge.
You nailed it. Well, thank you everybody for your time. We're out of time. I would again encourage everyone to join the chat and the community on the Whova app and continue the conversation there. And I think the major takeaway for me is that to stop trying to compare it to the old mediums and to let it be a new medium itself with new standards and creative spaces. Erica, any other final thoughts?
Nope. Thank you all so much. This is incredible to see your work. We look forward to seeing what's next.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Bye. Oh, kitty.
Cute. See you.
Wow, what a happy cat.
I'm a little biased. I'm a dog person, but it is a cute cat.
Same. Oh, well, that was amazing.
It was, I'm sad that we couldn't get to more questions because there are definitely more coming through in the Whova web app in the chat. Some great conversations there. So definitely pop over there if you have more thoughts. That was awesome.
Yeah, and thank you to our panelists for showing us the future of storytelling and machine-generated media. All right, so next up, we have an exciting afternoon of 3 workshops. Abe, which one are you going to?
I wish I can go to all of them. That's a tough one, but they're all great. But I'll be checking out Christian Wright's Data Insight session using data sets for the MBA. He has a lot of experience in both the college level, the MBA level, and with the WMBA.
Awesome. That sounds really cool. I'll be jumping into In3D's talk with Sergey and Dimitri about using your phone to do body scans. It seems like that's the next thing for fashion, avatars, gaming.
Wow, my son would love that. So to attend and join the workshops, head over to the Whova event web app for the conference and click agenda. You'll see a tab for day 3, Friday, October 9th. You scroll down and you add the 1 p.m. workshops, all the ones that you want to attend. See you on the other side.
Awesome. See you there.
See you.